Hello, I'm Sue Miller. I'm director of the Susanna Wesley Foundation, and I'm here with Cristina Gangemi. Welcome, Cristina, who is about to embark on the second year of her DTH, her doctorate in theology, a professional doctorate at the University of Roehampton. And Cristina is sponsored by the Susanna Wesley Foundation in conjunction with the Carmelites. So if you were asked to sum up what your doctoral studies are about, how would you do that?
I would say it's an exploration of empathy as a form of practice through the lens of disability theology in conversation with Edith Stein and Susanna Wesley.
So can you tell us about what you've been doing in your job before we move on to the actual PhD?
Yeah, so I work as a disability advisor. I work as an independent consultant 1 or 2 days a week, and then I do 4 days a week for the Livability charity, where my job is to make sure that I interact with people who use the services of Livability. So people with disabilities, intellectual disabilities, people who are non-verbal, people who communicate in very creative ways. And my job is wonderful because I go into the services and I share in their story. And then I take their story and I hand it back to the charity, helping them to understand and think about how they can make the lives of the people in their services livable, and the faith of the people, because it's a Christian charity. Very important to say, my job isn't about teaching the faith to people who are disabled, but it's about enabling the faith community to have space for that person to express all that God shares with them. A lot of our work has been, my own organisation, Kairos, has been to look at all of that theory and say, right, how can I change that into an activity where the person with intellectual disability, especially, because they're the most excluded, can go into a church and the church will know how to interact with that person. One of the most excellent resources for this actual activity is on the Methodist website, and that's its programme for looking at disability in the parish. It has lots of rich theology that's based on the human person rather than the disability, and it gives lots of tips to parishes as to what they can do to make their parish accessible.
And you were talking about Edith Stein, so where does she fit into all of this?
Edith Stein was born as a Jewish woman. She experienced being a suffragette, so she was very present at the beginning of sort of like the feminist movement. She then explored philosophy and phenomenology. She then began to look at Christianity because of her work in philosophy and phenomenology. And she found something in Christianity as a Jewish woman which was real and authentic and spoke to her of her study, which was in empathy. So Edith Stein, doctoral study is called On the Problem of Empathy. And that's because she realised that if we were to be truly human, and she did a lot of work on anthropology and ontology and what it means to be human, then empathy is one of the most important parts of our human existence.
And you mentioned Susanna Wesley earlier, potentially in conversation, I think, with Edith Stein. Just tell us just something very briefly about your perception so far of Susanna and what you've uncovered.
Apart from being one of the most formidable women I've ever read about. Yes. She's wonderful. She's real. She is very earthy. When I read about her, she's really talks about the real experience of life and the way in which God enters into that. In amongst a busy life with 19 children and lots of children with lots of different characters, all who needed her attention, a bit like, you know, the world of a person with autism, all this going on all around you, but actually I need to be with God. And so therefore Susanna's way of praying for me is very empathic. And at the same time it's very personal, because she's able to explore her own relationship with God and how that affects the life of other people.
And so with your doctorate, empathy is something that is featuring in your thesis.
Yes.
Can you tell me a bit more what it is you're aiming to get to?
So the doctoral study at present is called In Search of Empathy. So I'm trying to look at Edith Stein's work, phenomenological work on empathy, whereby she took empathy back to its origin. She asks about people's consciousness, about people's awareness of the other person, and what empathy actually means. So for me, I'm trying to explore empathy through the lens of disability theology, which is a theology that seeks to explore, study, understand God through the life experience and story of people with disabilities. And at the same time, try and see whether putting the two together, so an understanding of empathy with the development of disability theology, if that can be turned into a practice, so as that people who are in church don't just think about the lives of people with disabilities, but are able to actually communicate and engage with them in a way that's not sympathetic, but empathic. So the work of turning empathy into practice, I hope, will be to create empathic spaces and ways of creating empathic spaces that provide opportunities for people of all different creative ways of learning. I don't like the term learning disability. I've never met anybody who can't learn if what you do is creative. So removing any concept of learning disability, but creating an empathic space where people can express what God's doing in their life. And then that can be turned into a way of us reflecting and thinking even more deeply about God and about the touch of grace in people's lives.
But there's also some other exciting stuff coming up. You're about to publish a book called Because I Am, is that right? Can you just tell us a few things around that?
One of the areas that's really been neglected in the church is the experience of Christian parents who receive the pre-birth diagnosis. The child receives the pre-birth diagnosis of a medical condition, which could bring about an experience of disability. And there's nothing to help parents approach that in a way that's celebratory, that celebrates the person. So I've just written this resource, which is a book for parents so that they can meet disability theology in a way that's not really academic, it's just in simple language. And I've entwined it with the journey of Mary, Joseph and the unborn Jesus. And then I've written another book that gives the parish what to do and how to set up a group, Because I Am group, which accompanies the parent.
I think there's a course coming up that's being run by the Catherine of Siena College, whom we partner with in the Susanna Wesley Foundation, around disability. I believe you're aware of that and have actually run or will be running a session on it. Yeah. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more.
It's a 6-week course in Catherine of Siena College this academic year, which looks at a study of disability theology. So it merges disability studies, theology, and pastoral practice. So it's written by my colleague, Dr. Luca Bedetti, who is in the States, who is a very gifted theologian. And I'm doing a week on practice, how to transform it into practice.